Well, let's begin as we always do with the card. I think everybody's got a card. If you don't, we can get you one. Okay, so I'll kind of hold it up in case you don't have it. Okay, I'll say this together. Glory be to the Father,
Father,
who
by his almighty power,
created me in his image and likeness. Glory be to the Son, who in his
incarnation became man,
I could become
became
God.
God.
Glory be
Be
to
to the Holy Spirit,
who divinizes
is this means,
and makes me a partaker of his divine nature. Glory be to the holy and undivided Trinity, now and forever. Well, happy Holy Week to everybody. I'm going to put us all on mute as the apostles were on Calvary after Jesus died. They all went mute, and we had a day of being mute on Holy Saturday, and then they had a surprise on Easter Sunday, but a very peculiar kind of surprise. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll put you on mute, but please feel free to unmute yourself and ask anything you want or jump in anytime you want. So today we're going to talk about Easter and try to work our way into the real meaning of Easter, not the Easter Bunny. You know, I'm reminded right at the top of a story. You know, they wanted to know how smart are kids in Catholic grade schools these days. So the priest went into the classroom and said, who can tell me what happened on Easter Sunday? First little girl raises her hand and she said, wasn't that the time that Jesus was walking on the water and he kind of rose above the waves? The priest says, no, I'm sorry. It's good that you remember that about Jesus, but that wasn't when he walked on the water. The girl raised her hand. Wasn't that the time they gave him that big heavy cross and he went up that hill and they nailed him on the cross?
Getting closer.
And the priest said, getting closer, getting warmer, but that's not quite it. Everybody went, I don't know. Finally, the smartest kid in the class raises her hand and he says, yes, Jacqueline. She said, Father, I know what it is. It's when they after he died on the cross, they put him in the tomb and he was in there for 3 days. And then he came out and he saw his shadow and went back in.
God.
Now, if you have a what I think of as there's kind of two ways to do Christianity. There's two ways to do Catholicism. There's two ways to do faith. There's two ways really to be a human being. The one way is what I call paint by numbers. You know how when you're learning to paint, you know, you get the paint by numbers and you follow, you keep it in the lines and you get the right colors and you follow the instruction. And if you're in second grade and you do a paint by numbers, you're pretty darn proud of it. Okay. And that's a wonderful way to start. Religion and the practice of religion is kind of an exercise in paint by numbers. Somebody's guiding your hand. They're teaching you how to write within the lines. And, but the goal with it always is to turn you, or at least the goal of Christianity is to help you move from a person who knows how to paint by numbers to a person who knows how to make one's life look like Leonardo da Vinci, okay, or Michelangelo. So there's a kind of a wooden way to go about things and a kind of a blocky way, which all of us start out that way. It's the way of children. You have to have building blocks, but the goal is to build a platform from which you can launch yourself. And the goal is ultimately to move from discipline to discernment, to go from following rules to acquiring a certain vision, where if you live within the vision that is being given to you by your through your communion with God, you will acquire a vision that will allow you to live both in this world and in everything that is beyond this world, in a way that allows you to move quite naturally and instinctively, and you will know without having to think about it what the next right thing to do is. And in that life and in that vision and in that way of being, like a painter, when a Michelangelo sits down to do the Sistine Chapel, he doesn't think. He operates from a place within inside himself that nobody but him can see. And that's the place that God wants all of us to get to. And that's ultimately the point of Christianity. And ultimately it's the revelation of the resurrection as well. So I want to try to weave all those things together. But what I'm really trying to say here in a stumbling way at the outset is that whatever you think the resurrection is, it's not what normal people are taught that it is, namely the person of Jesus coming out of the tomb just like everybody knew him before. The resurrection is not the resuscitation of the body of the historical Jesus. Now, when they went to the tomb, they didn't find the body. So the body was raised from the dead, but it acquired a new kind of existence that so stunned the people who encountered it that they really had no words to describe it. So they describe it in these curious ways. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here because I want to go back to these 4 days that we're going to celebrate now, from Holy Thursday to Good Friday to Holy Saturday to Easter Sunday. Those 4 days comprise a single mystery into which, for Christians, we are meant to be drawn into this mystery, into this drama, into this story. And it's in that story that we're going to discover this new vision, this new world, this new capacity for discernment that I'm speaking from right now, and that all of us are meant to enter in such a way that it makes it possible for us to be in relationships with those we love and those who hate us and whom we are inclined to hate. It allows us to be in relationship with our friends and with our enemies in a way that elevates us, raises us to rise from the dead. We want to get into a space that allows us to be raised beyond the level of our normal interactions with people, even though we will remain, to their eyes, we will remain the same people we always were interacting with them, but we will be operating from a different space. We will be living in a different space. We will be living in a different world, even though we will still be in this world. And when Christ was trying to explain this, what I'm explaining to you now, to his apostles, he said, when I leave you, I'm praying for you that you will learn like I am. You will learn to be as I am, which is, I know how to be in the world, but not be of the world. Okay? To be of the world means to operate just like every other mad political talk host on the radio. Okay, or like every shouting couple in a divorce proceeding. That's to be of the world. To be in the world, but not of the world, is to have a different internal operating system. And the event of the resurrection is the revelation of that operating system. And it's also the power that is within the world that makes it possible for us to acquire that operating system, that vision, that kind of life, that source of life, that way of seeing. It's more a way of seeing than it is a way of living. If I see properly, I will live properly. If I don't have a vision, a higher vision than the vision of the world, I will stumble in the dark, and my life will be darkness, and I will be a blind person, and my life and all my relationships will be like the blind leading the blind. Okay, so I'm running a lot of themes together here, but I want to give you a glimpse that what the mystery of the resurrection is is saying to the world is that there is a way of being in the world that allows you to be outside the world even while you're in the world. And it makes your ability to be in the world a joy even in the midst of suffering. And that's the vision, that's the life, that's the promise of Christianity. It's also present in all other religions in a certain manner or form, but it's crystallized and vivified and incarnationalized in the Christian religion. And I speak from the Christian standpoint, even though I'm quite aware that when Christ says to us, I am the resurrection and the life, he's speaking of himself as also the truth of all these other religions, because what they are searching for is the very one that he is, and which we are also in the very centerpiece of our nature. We are also one with Christ. That's why he says, when you pray, you should pray, Our Father. You and I are plugged into the same source of life, and the life that you see that I live and I give to the world, this life I want to give to you by bringing you to a place to realize that that life is already in you. It's a matter of you learning how to open yourself to that life in the same way that I am continually open to that life. Okay, so that's a lot here. We'll just do that so I can take a drink of water here. Okay. It's because of this vision that I'm starting to lay out to you that we call the crucifixion of Christ Good Friday. Okay, I want to let's see here now. I want to go back. So we're right at the start of Holy Week. Okay, so tomorrow night, we're going to celebrate what is typically called the Last Supper. Remember now, everything I'm doing on this Wednesday gathering is I'm trying to take your paint by numbers version of the Last Supper and your paint by numbers version of Good Friday. And nobody has a very good paint by numbers version of Holy Saturday. That's kind of the stepchild of Holy Week. But Easter Sunday, we really have a paint by numbers version when we think that of the resurrection as Jesus kind of knocking on the tomb saying, let me out, and if I can see my shadow. That's not what the resurrection is. If let me put it this way. If you had been at the tomb on Easter morning before Mary Magdalene arrived there, you wouldn't have seen it. If there was a video camera there, there'd be nothing on it. Okay, so just let's leave that image in your mind for just a minute, because I'm trying to adjust your lens here. I'm trying to replace your little phone camera of the resurrection with the most advanced Nikon. I'm not a camera person. My son probably would know what the proper technology is, but we want to move from the crystal set version of the resurrection to high definition television. Okay, so we're gonna get there in a minute though. Okay, in order to understand the resurrection, we want to go back to Holy Thursday. So we'll walk through all 4 days here, because the same mystery that we experience on Easter Sunday, the same mystery is present on Holy Thursday. The same mystery is present on Good Friday. The same mystery is present on Holy Saturday. And the same mystery is made luminous on Easter Sunday. But it's all the same mystery. And in fact, every event in Christ's life, if we had the eyes to see, we would see the same Christ that the apostles saw after he rose from the dead. Jesus talked about himself as, I am the resurrection and the life. He didn't say, he also did say, I am going to rise from the dead. But even prior to his rising from the dead, he was the resurrection. Okay. In other words, he rose from the dead because he was the resurrection. He didn't become the resurrection and the life because he rose from the dead. Does that make any sense to anybody? In other words, he had the power that overcomes death even while he was alive. It didn't take death to prove that death could not hold him. He was already beyond death even when he was living as a person who was destined to go through death. So there, and really, I said this several gatherings back early on this year, but you could boil the whole, Christian mystery down to the revelation that death itself is an illusion pulled over the eyes of the human race by the deceiver. In other words, Christ comes to reveal to us that death is not. And what you understand to be death, he always called falling asleep. Do you remember when they said, come and see my daughter? And they said, oh, don't even ask him to come anymore. Your daughter has already died. And Jesus said, she's not dead, she's only asleep. And they laughed at him. And then he went in and took her at a hand and said, little girl, arise. So he did that several times during his ministry. He so-called raised people from the dead, but to him, nobody is dead. Nobody could possibly be dead any more than you can destroy matter. You know, if you take an atom and you try to smash an atom, you don't get rid of the atom, you just get an expanse of energy. And you could actually look at the resurrection. I mean, one metaphor that I've often tried to use for people to understand the mystery that we're conveying here is, if you look at Good Friday as the annihilation of matter, if you look at Good Friday as Christ being annihilated on the cross, like nuclear scientists try to annihilate neutrons, protons, and electrons, they're not able to annihilate them at the maximum point of destructive pressure. What actually happens is that matter is converted into energy. Okay, and what has happened in the resurrection is that the Paschal mystery is a mystery just like that. The physical form of the Christ is being annihilated by the cyclotron of this world. And it's annihilating and dissolving the physical Christ, but he's not going away. He's just changing into a different form of presence. The miracle of which that conversion of like matter to energy that happens in a nuclear explosion, and Pope Benedict XVI compared the resurrection to a nuclear explosion. Christ's physical presence was annihilated, and a presence that is more powerful and more pervasive and more present than anything he was when he was walking around as a historical figure. That presence has now been disseminated and diffused like a nuclear explosion. You know how when the nuclear bomb goes out, you see these little rings of energy. And in that case, that energy is destructive energy. But in the case of Christ, that energy goes out just like a nuclear explosion to the farthest reaches of the cosmos. But rather than wrecking everything in its wake, it actually transforms everything in its wake, and it moves it from being two-dimensional to three-dimensional. It moves it from being blah colors into vivid colors. So the annihilation and explosion of the resurrected Christ through this thing we call the Paschal mystery is actually the vivification and the transfiguration and the deification of the entire cosmos. Now, we have not seen its full effects yet, just like in a nuclear explosion, though the effects of a nuclear explosion are all negative and death dealing. The effects of the explosion of Christ from the tomb on Easter Sunday is an effect just in the opposite direction. It makes everything better and fuller and more perfect than it ever imagined that it could be. However, the beauty of what he's doing will not be known until the end of time. It's almost as if the world is dying, it's also being renewed at the same time. You have two powers in the world going in opposite directions at one time. We have entropy on the one hand, where the universe is collapsing in on itself, and then you have the power of the resurrection raising the entire universe back to this new heaven and new earth that John the Apostle envisioned in his book of Revelation. Time for another drink. Okay, I'm going on as I do to give you a glimpse now of a cosmic vision that is the aftermath of the resurrection. But the explosion was absolutely without any noise, and the explosion was absolutely without any drama. But it has now the energy that was in the historical person of Christ, the life that was in him. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the life of the world. I am the light of the world. That's what he's saying. When you annihilate me, what will happen is all of the life of God that is in me will now be injected and inseminated and infused and wedded with and melded with every particle of the universe, such that when it all comes together in my Father's own good time, you will see an entire picture of perfection that will retain every single human being who has ever been created as a unique, irrepeatable person, but they will be there shining in the resplendent glory of my risen and resurrected life. That's the promise of the resurrection. You probably won't hear that at too many parishes this Easter Sunday, but I'm telling you here on the Wednesday gathering, okay? I want to talk about how then is there anybody who has a question about that, or anybody who's not just
I do. Is this going to be like the second?
So Gretchen question is what you're describing the second coming of Christ? And the answer to that is yes. The first coming of Christ has resulted in the annihilation of the historical Jesus, but the conversion of the historical Jesus into the cosmic Christ. And this means now that this life that was in Christ, which is perfect communion with the one he calls his Father, that life is now not only in every person, both all of past history and all of future history, but it's also in every created particle of matter, including molecules and protons and neutrons. So everything now has the very life of the risen Christ within it, but the full effects and the full self-consciousness of that fusion of the life of God with the creation that God has made, the conscious experience of that is known currently only to those we call mystics or saints. They can palpably feel a life within themselves that is greater than themselves, and that it's a life that has them rather than a life that they have. And in that life that they know that has them, that is also one with them, they can already feel themselves being taken up into that life, which is what banishes their own fears about being with God forever, or their doubts about being with everyone and everything forever. Okay, but let's slow down a little bit and go back to Holy Thursday, because what I want to say now is that same mystery of the conversion of Christ to a different form, that same mystery is what you see unfolding in these 3 or 4 days. And I want to focus on one line in particular from, well, we say it every day at Mass, but it's especially pertinent to Holy Thursday. So I want to talk about Holy Thursday. That's the Last Supper. We call it the Last Supper for a reason. Jesus says, I will not drink the fruit of the vine again until I drink it with you in the kingdom of God. What he's signaling here is, I'm basically done with this life. And there's a line we say every day at Mass, and it goes in one ear and out the other because we don't listen to the words that are said at Mass. But if we did, we would be moved. We would be in touch with the resurrection when we hear all the lines, but this one in particular. The priest says just before the consecration, he says, on the night he was betrayed, which is Holy Thursday, on the night he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion. Now, I want to focus for a minute. Do we need to close this door or not? She's going to close that one out there. Great. That's right. Okay. Just forgive me for a minute here. We're just, we got some noise going on in the house here. Suppose they had that problem at the Last Supper too. Hey, get those people to shut up out there. We're having the Passover. Okay. So let's, boy, I could give my homily again from today's Mass because it's the episode of Judas. But boy, I'm tempted to do that, but we have limited time here. So let's just talk about that line because it's pertinent for Holy Thursday. On the night he was betrayed, Holy Thursday, and entered willingly into his passion. Okay, the key word here is willingly. I think I mentioned last time when we were talking about the agony of Christ, and I was trying to give you a framework last time on the Wednesday gathering to look at Good Friday as an event that is truly good. And maybe I'll combine, I'm not going to go through the atonement thing again today and try, because I think I've hopefully disarmed you of that model for viewing Good Friday, but let's look at the goodness of Good Friday and the goodness of Holy Thursday, and it consists in that one word, willingly. I said last week that the agony of Christ all through his life was that he was not of this world. You are of this world. You are from below. I am from above, he says. You live according to the flesh. I live according to the spirit. He's not talking about bodily existence. He's talking about two different frames of mind. You paint by numbers. I'm Michelangelo. You play by reading music. I play by listening to my Father. So you are of this world. You are of the earth. I am of the heavens. But I have come into your world so I can lift you into my world. Now, then John goes on to say he came to his own, those who were very expert at painting by numbers, namely the scribes and the Pharisees who lived according to the law. They were very good about being bean counters. They were very good about painting in the lines. They were very good about following directions. I came to my own, but my own received me not. He was too much of a scandal for the people who only knew one way of envisioning God. But to those who did, and so he came to his own, but his own received him not. But to those who did receive him, he gave the power to become children of God. In other words, he gave them the power to plug in to the same love that made it possible for him to willingly enter his passion. One of the key things to know here about Christ and about the risen life of Christ that we are all being invited into, and we've actually all been initiated into, and we've all been given a share in without our being able to either access it or make it our permanent possession in terms of our conscious experience. The key thing to realizing there is what? I've just lost my train of thought. It's to realize that there was no resentment in Christ. There was a great agony. He came to his own, his own received him not. It's like Michelangelo wanting to make everybody a perfect artist, and he realizes most people just have no interest in it whatsoever. It's a grandmother who wants to share her cooking with her grandchildren, and they don't want to come over and receive it. It's the son who wants to spend time with his father on the weekend, and the delinquent father doesn't want to show up. It's unrequited love. Christ died on Good Friday, not of a broken body, but of a broken heart. And he had that agony from the very beginning. The first person who ever saw him in the temple, Simeon, said to Mary, "Your heart is going to be pierced with a sword. This son of yours is a sign of contradiction. Some will love him, most will hate him, and he will die on a cross." I mean, he didn't say all those things, but they were implied. He will be a stumbling block to many. Christ knew that. but it grieved him. That's the main thing. It grieved him. We see expressions of anger in the gospel by Christ. Woe are you, this is an evil generation that seeks a sign. But this anger is the superficial or the immediate reaction of an unrequited love. It's an expression of frustration. We talked about Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus last week, and we said everybody misinterprets that phrase. Jesus wept. He wasn't weeping because Lazarus had died. He was weeping that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, still having known him as the resurrection and the life for 3 years, still did not realize that death is an illusion. Lazarus is not dead. He's only sleeping. But for your sake, he tells his apostles, I'm glad I wasn't there, because you stupid people who still think that death exists, I have to go and show you that he's really only sleeping. What you see as death, I see as the conversion of one form of life to the higher life that I'm trying to give you so you can live it now, even before you die. That's the emotion with which Christ speaks. It's an emotion of a deeply desirous heart that we have everything that he has, or more appropriately, that we awaken to the fact that we have everything that he has, if we only knew how to drop our fears and enter into it. I don't think Jesus knew Garth Brooks, but if he did, he would have heard that song. Heaven's not beyond the clouds, it's just beyond our fears. And that's what Christ was trying to tell people. Heaven's not beyond the clouds. You look for vain in God, for God in the law or in the heavens. The Magi discovered that. We've been looking for God in the wrong place. We've been looking for him up in heaven. He's right here in this person. And that little baby revealed to them at the same time, what you see in me is also in you, because that's what brought you here in the first place. So Jesus' whole vision was to show people the kingdom of God does not come with signs. The kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is at hand. The kingdom of God is right within your reach. That was the whole mission and message and invitation of Christ. And yet there were so few, very few, including to some extent, even, I mean, his mother and St. John and Mary Magdalene, the three ones who remained most faithful to him, they believed it. And it transformed them at the depths of their being. But they could have never said to you, none of them, what I'm saying to you now. They didn't understand it. This is no knock on them. They knew it without being able to put it into words. We have 2,000 years of church history reflecting on this same mystery. Things that come out of my mouth are only things that other saints and other people who have contemplated the faith of Mary, John, and Mary Magdalene and seen the life and death and resurrection of Christ have said about it. So I'm just sharing with you what others who have gone before me have said.
Did they feel it?
They felt it. They felt it, and that's why Jesus wept. Jesus wept because he thought that Mary and Martha had understood this at the core of their being, that they have nothing to weep about. He was weeping because they were weeping. He was weeping because they still felt it necessary to wail and moan at the death of their brother. Have you not understood who I am? So this leads in then to Holy Thursday, because that event was quite close to Holy Thursday. And I said last week that as we get to this point in Christ's life, after he has exhausted himself, trying to confront their obstreperousness, trying to address their lack of faith, trying to tell parables to them to kind of mirror back to them their own hardness of heart. He's doing everything as a human being he can think of to get them to believe and to get them to open up to an experience of God that is not the lawgiver, that is greater than the lawgiver, that is greater than Solomon, greater than the prophets, greater than Jonah, greater than Abraham, greater than anything they can imagine. God is, Jesus says, God is as I do. Look what I do. The dead are raised, the deaf hear, the blind see. My God, my Father does that ad infinitum. All things will be restored in me. So he wanted everybody to believe, and yet so few people did. And even those who did believe did not know, like Martha and Mary, they did not know how to enter that space with him as continuously as he was able to manifest it to them. And as he gets towards his earthly life, it dawns on him, this is my interpretation now, and I believe this is part of his agony in the garden. I mean, kind of the last part of his agony. Again, the agony is always the same. The agony is that they're either indifferent or they don't understand, or they're not open, which is the same thing. They have hard hearts, or they have dull minds, or they have both. And even those who do get me only get me in bits and pieces. Even John, the one who got him the most, said, "Do you want us to call down fire on him from the heavens?" Now, and I almost want to detour to John and Peter and Judas here for a second, because all three of them in their own way denied Jesus, because they were captive by another image of God, and they were also captive by a certain understanding of who the Messiah was going to be. And Jesus didn't match any of those expectations. So they were both attracted and bewildered, and their bewilderment led them each in their own way to lose faith in him at certain points, even though their words belied their hearts. So towards the end of his life, Jesus comes to the realization that I have, in this form, in my body, I have done everything that is conceivably possible for me to do to move these people from people of the world to people being in the world but not of it. So I've not been able, it began to dawn on him as a human being that my presence to them as a human being is now producing diminishing returns. There's nothing more left for me to do.
Earl and I were talking last night. I said, this kind of makes God look like a failure.
I believe that Jesus at the end of his life said, in human terms, I have been a total failure. And what I'm trying to say here is, he was fine with that, because he knew what was in human beings. He knew that it was like trying to get blood from a stone. Trying to put spirit in flesh is like trying to get blood from a stone. It has diminishing returns. At the same time, he was aware that this eternal life, this life beyond life, this life that is stronger than death, this union that he felt with God, that for him made death just a form of sleep. And actually, and in the early church, this was the case. Many of the early church fathers, I'm thinking in particular, excuse me for a second, it's too warm in here. Maybe we can open that door again, Kathy. I think it's a little, yeah, kitchen. Many of the early church fathers, because Jesus so often referred to death as falling asleep, many of the early church fathers said that death was actually a gift, because in death we awaken from the nightmare of this life into the reality of God's truth. How in kids softball they have the mercy rule, 7 runs. The early church fathers often looked at death as God's gift to people who are ruining themselves so completely that they might lose their ability to get in touch with the life of God within them forever if he doesn't put an end to the misery. And honestly, St. Ambrose in particular said, especially for people who are going from a bad life to a worse life, death is the best thing that can happen to them, because it calls a time out and keeps them from destroying themselves any further than they already have. Now, you can never really destroy yourself, because the life of God and the image and likeness of God that I am is always present in a person, and all the things that we call sins, etc., and even things we call virtues are simply coats of cosmetic that we put on the true person that God created us to be in the first place. So coming back to Holy Thursday, then he realizes, I've come to the end of my time here. The good that I can do using this body and these words and this mouth, it has exhausted itself. So I'm ready, Father, for you to transition my way. And we come back now to an essential lesson of the Wednesday gatherings. Always recall that even though Jesus was a human being, he was before that, before he became incarnate in the womb of Mary, he existed as the eternal Word and the Son of God, but he existed in a different form, a form that is incomprehensible to the human person. He became man in order to show us how he always has been from all eternity. He has translated his divinity through the transistor or through the semiconductor of his humanity in order to give us a visual expression, really a sacramental expression of an invisible reality of love that is impossible for us in our finite condition to conceive of. But it is that divinity that he desires to impart to us. And it's that divinity that he says, you've also, you and me, we've also been created in the image and likeness of that divinity. So the real marriage that he's asking for or inviting us to here is, I would like to give you a share in my divinity so that it unites to the divine life that is already within you. And you and we, you and we, and you and everybody you love, and we, my Father, the Spirit, and I, we will all be one. We will be one as divine persons, and you will be one as human persons, but we will all be one big happy family, would be too trite a way of putting it, but we are going to be one complete, eternal, ineffably happy communion together. And that, and Christ came into the world to be able to enable us to live in that holy communion of divine love long before our physical instrument wears out itself, because that's our destiny. We don't have destiny anymore. Did we scare her off? Yeah, go check on her and we'll see where she is. She may have heard some things for her destiny today, so we'll see. Okay. But that's our destiny, is communion with God. And he would like us to be able to enjoy that destiny before we enter into it in a way that is beyond our ability to say yes to. Okay, all that having been said, because he knows now on Holy Thursday that my time, my conveyance of presence to the world as a human being is now, there's no more to do. The computer is maxed. There's nothing more for me to do. And in human terms, I've been a total failure. And we're going to even push it further. I'm going to look like even more of a failure tomorrow when they come and arrest me as a criminal. And not only that, I'm going also to be abandoned, because you're all going to abandon. Oh, no, Lord, we will never abandon you. Oh, so, and as I changed the words in the gospel today, when Judas said, is it I, Lord? The book actually says, and Jesus said to Judas, you said so. But really, the way it would have sounded at the Last Supper was Judas says, is it I, Lord? And Jesus would have said, so you say. You know, when you say to somebody, so you say, see, Jesus said the exact same thing to Peter. I will never leave you. I will never deny you. I will never betray you. And Jesus turned to him and says, so you say. He's not accusing them. In fact, he's creating a space in which they can still get out of it now if they want. They can become undeceived if they like. That's how he said it to them. So you say. That's what I hear you tell me. You know, it's like my two favorite phrases when I don't know what to say and somebody says, you're the worst priest I ever heard preach. And I look at them and I say, there you go. What can I say? You don't commit one way or the other, but you create a space in which we can still be friends. Okay. Well, that's what Jesus was doing, but he knew that they would all leave him. Now, here's the important point. On the night he was betrayed and abandoned and arrested and convicted and thrown into the place we're going to visit in Israel, one of the most powerful places ever to visit there, down in the dungeon. They have a place where through the floor, they lowered prisoners on the night before their execution. They would lower them down by ropes, and it's a pit, literally a pit, underground pit. You can still see the bloodstains on the walls from prisoners who were held there, even in ancient times. And they were usually scourged again down there and let out to die if they were still alive in the morning. And you can go down in there and read the psalm, I go down into the depths, O Lord, where are you? So that's where Jesus spent his last night. So he's going to the very bottom of what the world considers important. But he's doing it willingly. And this is the key to see. This is where you catch a glimpse of the resurrection, even on Holy Thursday. And I said last time, we haven't gotten to Good Friday yet. I better keep an eye on the time. We got time. We call Good Friday, and I said last time, when you look at different crucifixes, if you look at the crucifix behind me, you see Christ in agony, because we've identified Good Friday so much with the pain that he suffered on the cross. But if you look at the earlier images of the cross and all the images of the cross in the Christian East, where this vision of Christ as the resurrection and the life is the light that in which they look at everything in Christianity, you'll see that the corpus on the Christ on the cross has a very peaceful look on his face, if not actually the faintest glimmer of a smile. If you look at the cross of St. Francis of Assisi, Jesus looks like he's sleeping, looks like he's in repose. And what you're seeing there is you're seeing why we call it Good Friday. He went to the garden, went to the cross, was killed without any of his support system around, except his mother and Mary Magdalene and John, maybe one or two other holy women. But the main anchor that he had was the anchor he never lost, connection with his Father. And actually, there was a certain joy in Jesus. Now it has come to, I'm paraphrasing now in kind of a prophetic mode, but it would have sounded something like this. Father, you've now made it clear to me that my purpose coming among them as a man has been finished. I also trust you now to make me present to them in a way that I am not capable of doing as a human being. And I entrust you to bearing the fruit that your seed, which has come upon this world in my body, now that it is dying and falling into the ground, as I so often preached in my parables, I trust, Father, that you will now make that bear fruit in a way that I can only surrender to you and to our Holy Spirit. That was pretty good. We should have the apocryphal Gospel of Krill. And so he went to his cross with a smile on his face. He went into the garden. Now, I had an email from a good friend of mine yesterday saying, but what about those words, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I will answer that question by singing to you the first line of the national anthem. Oh, say, if you hear those two notes, do you know what's coming?
Yeah.
Yes. And do you know how the song ends? It's an uplifting thing, right? And the whole hope of the brave. Okay. Well, now I guess not everybody in our country is doing that right now, but the Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Anybody who had heard those words going by the cross would have realized that they would have sounded to their ears like the first line of the national anthem sounds to ours. It was the first line of a very famous psalm of victory, that no matter where I go and no matter how desolate it gets, I know that you are there to save me and to keep me safe. It's Psalm 22. And you can read the whole thing through and you will realize that at the end, it's a psalm of hope and trustful surrender. And anybody Anybody passing the cross would have known that he was singing in triumph, not agonizing in a lack of faith. Okay, so these are things you need to know in order to understand. Now, the other mystery that I want to really make evident, and before I talk a little bit and finish the session today with a few more comments about the resurrection. I've said before, and I'm going to say again on this recording so that it's down there for posterity. Because Christ is the resurrection and the life, before he dies or before he rises from the dead, that means that he is who he is at every moment and in everything that he does, okay? And so what I want to tell you is that as the resurrection and the life on the cross, the crucifixion, the death of Christ on the cross, and his rising from the grave are exactly the same mystery at the same moment. In other words, imagine you had Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and and Easter Sunday, all compressed into a single molecule. Okay, what you see in the Paschal mystery is you see that one molecule stretched out over 4 days. It's the exact same mystery that you're witnessing on all 4 of those days. The death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ are exactly the same event. Let me explain it a little further. When Christ says that he is the resurrection and the life, and I did this in a gathering, I think maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I'm going to take one step back. I hope I don't lose you here. You remember when St. Paul, who only experienced Christ as the resurrection, I mean, in his resurrected form, Christ appeared, the risen Christ appeared to Paul. Apparently also like the early apostles in a way that they could see and that they could understand, but it was way beyond their understanding at the same time. But it was at least there was something visible about it. Remember, Paul was blinded, fell off the horse. Well, later when Paul tried to describe who is this person of Jesus, he never referred to his historical existence. He didn't know him as a historical person, though there are some scholars who think that he probably did encounter him, but paid him no attention because he was a carpenter from Nazareth. So it's possible that Paul saw him, but he only really knew Jesus as the risen Christ. And when he tried to describe the mystery of the person that he knew, he described him this way: though he was in the form of God, he did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Rather, he poured himself out, assuming the form of a slave, even to the point of accepting the cross. So Paul's experience of Jesus was the one who was basically identical with death. If you understand death to mean the power of self-forgetfulness, self-letting go-ness. In other words, Paul encountered the mystery of Christ as the mystery of surrender, of the mystery of non-resistance, of the mystery of love. Love which has no other agenda than simply to be there, but not to grasp onto or try to sustain its own existence. Does that make some sense? That language make a little bit of sense? Christ is the one who continually relinquishes who he is so that we might be better who we are. He's always the one who's giving himself, never taking for himself. And in that sense, the mystery of Christ and the mystery of death are the same thing. They are a total letting go-ness, what Meister Eckhart used to call the mystery of relinquishment. And when I relinquish, when I get into that space of not deeming anyone to be grasped at, any person to be held on to, any child to be controlled, any problem to be wrestled with. When I let go absolutely of things that I'm wrestling with, or I'm struggling with, or I'm fighting with, when I fight with things, their strength grows stronger and my strength grows less. When I let go, they lose their power over me and I grow strong. When I let go, I feel an immediate peace. When I stop fighting with someone, I feel immediate peace. The moment I stop fighting, the fight is over. And even if they choose to kill me and continue to pummel me, anybody watching it will realize that I have more of the power, because I have just assumed the moral high ground. So when I let go, I actually rise. And that's why I say the letting go-ness of Christ that we call Calvary is simultaneously the rising up of Christ. And if you look at it in his as a divine word, he lets go and he rises upside. You can, in this world and in God's world, you can't let go of anything without immediately rising. My father tried to teach me this lesson one time when he was trying to teach me to swim. We went out into Lake Erie and we went out with a beach ball. And he says, "What's in this beach ball?" And I said, "Air." And he said, "Now, how strong do you think air is?" And I said, "Well, not very strong." So he puts the beach ball under the waves. He says, "What do you think is stronger, this lake or this beach ball?" And he let the beach ball go and it rose from the tomb, popped up out of the water. He said, "Now you need to be the beach ball. You need to be air. You need to be light. Let me hold you in my arms. You're too heavy. You're going to sink like a rock." I'm sure that's why Jesus said to Peter, "You are the rock." He was dense. Bloop, bloop, you are the rock. Be light, my father said. Be light. What he was really saying is let go, loosen up, relax. If you relax, you float. If you relax, you rise. If you tighten up or hold on or grasp at, you sink. That's the law of the universe. Christ is embodying as the resurrection and the life, the law of the universe. He is the one who has light, a light touch. He is the one who is all light. I am the light of the world, not just illumination, but levity of spirit. G.K. Chesterton said, "Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly." When somebody's trying to get you to stop being so serious, they say, "Lighten up." The whole mystery of Calvary is a word to the world: lighten up. Let go and you will rise. Do not resist death and you will conquer death. Surrender to evil and you will trample upon evil. Do not collude with evil. Do not enable evil, but do not resist evil with evil. Overcome evil with lightheartedness. And even if it kills you, you will live. Those who believe in me, even if they die, yet shall they live. Those who believe in letting go, because I am the mystery of letting go-ness. I am the one who does not deem anything worthy to be grasped at. I am the one who empties myself every time, all the time, for everyone. Be like me, be like water, be like air, rise from the dead. Death is holding on, life is letting go. Those who try to hold on to their lives will lose them. They will sink in the ocean of misery. Those who let go of their lives will rise, will walk on the water, and will ascend to the heavens because they hold on to nothing of this earth. That's the message and mystery of Christ. And that's what you see being enacted on Calvary and from the tomb, okay? So, okay, that's part 3 of today's presentation. We have a half an hour to go, and I probably won't use even all of that, but that deserves 2. That is, if you could understand this, that you are meant to be light all the time. Don't fight with anybody. Don't hold any resentments. If somebody gets under your skin, say, "Lord, bless them, change me." And immediately you have space. You need breathing room. You need silence. You need letting go-ness. And all of Christianity, this is where I'll make it real. So all of Christianity is God trying to impart the spirit of letting go-ness to us crazy human beings who are doubling down on our little fiefdoms in such a way that is creating a living hell for all of us. Christ comes to save us from ourselves. He comes from the Father to save us from ourselves, not to save us from God's anger. There is no anger in God. If God had anger, he would have destroyed the world a long time ago. I guess he did, didn't he? With that, well, he didn't really. He just said, I need a do-over. And we talked about that last week, so I'm not going to reiterate that as well. So we've got to read all those Old Testament floods through the eyes of the divine mercy. In any case, Easter Sunday. Okay, so Good Friday, think of Jesus as rising because he's letting go. So the moment he lets go on the cross, he's already risen from the grave. It's only going to be manifest a couple days later. But it's all the same mystery. We just see it in time sequence. But you know how when you take a mirror and you see your image in the mirror and you drop the mirror and it breaks into 10 pieces? Well, if you pick up every piece, you'll see your face there too. Okay, so the Paschal mystery is like the gospel is like a mirror that's been dropped. Every little piece has the same face of Christ in it. And the face of Christ is the same in the resurrection as it was on Calvary, as it is on Holy Thursday. It's the same face. It's the one who conquers death by letting go. The one who conquers evil by not resisting it. By just letting it peter itself out at his own expense. He makes himself, actually, this is another way of thinking of what's happening on the cross. He's basically saying to the world and to the evil one, here, you can make me your human piñata, have at it. And just keep beating me until you're sick and tired of it. And when you get tired, you'll see what you have done and your hearts will be turned. So he actually willingly becomes the victim of our own mendacity, our own malice. Again, his purpose, like in the parables, the crucifixion in a certain sense is just another parable he's taking. He's trying to show he's trying to show himself as the victim of our evil so that he can hold a mirror up to us. And it did work with the first centurion who stuck the spear in his side. He saw what they had done to this innocent man. And even in his Roman rage, the Spirit of God touched him at the deepest level of his being. And he said, truly, this was the Son of God. And they say that man then left the army and became an early Christian martyr because he refused to kill anymore. Because he saw himself in the mirror of what those people, including himself, were doing to this innocent man. And Christ was willing to surrender himself to that because he had consummate confidence that his Father would then take all these episodes and all these words and all these memories of his earthly existence, and he would use them in concert with his risen presence to bring eventually all people into the experience of risen life through the mystery of letting go.
That's weird.
And that's what's happening, okay? So Christ was peaceful in his surrender because he trusted his Father to take the debris of his human life, including the memories of his apostles and the words that he had said and the miracles that he had worked and the body that was being buried, that the Father would take all those fragments of a shattered human life and he would use them in concert with their Holy Spirit and Christ's risen presence that Christ was awaiting by going to his death or his letting go-ness, his event of total letting go as a human being. That should be our death too. Our death should be that we should wish for our death as the final, grand, and greatest opportunity to make an act of surrender that we should be making in every encounter that we have with other people by letting go of our attempts to control them. And when you do that, you just experience pure joy. If people want to hurt themselves, then they can hurt themselves, and I'll be there for them to help them pick up the pieces. But I'm not going to help them hurt themselves, and I'm not going to try to stop them hurting themselves. I'm just going to always be there for them until they awaken to the care they are called to take to their own self. If I keep helping them, they'll never awaken. In any event. So Christ, we call it Good Friday, and it's a happy event all the way through because Christ has already surrendered himself into the hands of his Father. He never stopped surrendering himself into the hands of his Father. That was the whole point and beauty of his ministry. He says, look at the birds of the field. They have enough to eat. Don't take 2 coats. We got it. 1 is enough. Come on, let's go. God will provide. So that's a little bit. So let's talk about the resurrection itself, because the event of the resurrection, not the videotape early morning, what happened at the tomb and where did the angels come from and the rest of it. Excuse me here, I got something popping up on my screen. Let's come back to there we are. Okay. Not how did the stone get rolled away and where did the angels come from and where did the body go? Not that vision of the resurrection. The resurrection as encountered by the first witnesses. And we know that the first witness was Mary Magdalene, right? And she was there, she came, she was still weeping. You see, she still did not understand him. She was devoted to him. And you say to yourself, it's only natural that she would cry. It's only human. It's actually not human. It's actually, in Jesus' view, it's actually subhuman. I only weep when I have not understood God. I don't want to debate that point, and I don't want to talk anybody out of their current grief by any means. And at one level, grief is very natural, and all of us experience it, and all of us go through it. But the grief that Jesus had at the tomb of Lazarus was grief about our need to still be grieving. And he wants to take us beyond the world of grief. He wants to take us beyond the world of death. He wants to take us beyond the world of worry. He wants to take us especially beyond the world of fear. And all of those things are synonymous. Death and fear, they're the same thing. If I'm afraid, I'm already dead. I've already put a lid on what God can do with me or through me. But there was nevertheless, despite the fact that when Christ was the resurrection all the way through the Paschal mystery and in every event of his own life, because the historical Jesus, after he was annihilated, was converted into the risen Christ by the power of the Father. What came out of that tomb, or what was no longer, the body was no longer in that tomb, but in its place was a mystery of risen presence that was both synonymous with the historical Jesus. It's a mysterious form of presence that at times became visible in a way that resembled the Jesus they always knew, but also did not resemble the Jesus they always knew. And the sense in which it did not resemble the Jesus that they always knew was much, much, much greater than the way that it did resemble the Jesus that they knew. Now, I want to draw, I mean, we'll do maybe more Zoom meetings on this down the road. We've got about 20 minutes left. I just want to look at two episodes of people encountering the risen Christ, though there are many. But these two are especially instructive to try to show you that the way we meet Christ now, and maybe I'll throw in a third with St. Paul, though I could talk about him for at least 4 years without stopping. But let's start with Mary Magdalene, okay? And this the first two. So I want to do 3 episodes: Mary Magdalene, the 2 apostles on the road to Emmaus, and then St. Paul. Okay, now I want to put St. Paul in a special category because his experience of the risen Lord was fundamentally different, not fundamentally different, but even more different from the first two than the first two were from the way they experienced Jesus before he died. Okay, everybody with me here? Okay, so what Mary Magdalene and the apostles on the way to Emmaus, what they both have in common is they encountered a person who was not a ghost. They encountered a person who was just like, they encountered persons who looked exactly like ordinary human beings, but it was Jesus. Okay, now and I say that, I put that out there, that they looked exactly like ordinary human beings, because there are other resurrection appearances, like when he comes through the wall, that he does have a human form, but he doesn't look exactly like an ordinary human being. Though at a certain point he says, do you have anything to eat? And he eats something and he says to them, notice a ghost does not have flesh. And they're there kind of like, so he's not exactly a ghost, but he's not exactly like an ordinary human being either. So there's those set of resurrection appearances that have a ghost-like character to them. The two with Emmaus and Mary Magdalene do not. They're just plain old ordinary. Mary Magdalene mistook him for the gardener. Okay, and the apostles on the road to Emmaus misunderstood him as a stranger who was just walking around. Remember, they said, are you the only one? Are you the only? There was nothing remarkable about this guy, so they did not. So his presence to them was hidden, even though it was him. Okay, now what can we learn from that? And what do we want to hold on from that? There's a little difference between the Mary Magdalene appearance and the Emmaus. So let's start with the Emmaus first. So the two, you remember the story of the two, they say, are you the only one who heard? He said, no. Well, heard about what? Plays dumb, like he did with Judas. So you say, so don't you don't say. Have you heard about those things in Jerusalem? What things? You don't say. Okay, you see, he's not playing with them. He's trying to bring them to the same place that he's at. So they go in and he says, well, here's how I understand the scriptures. And he begins to show them that you've been captive to a different picture of the Messiah. There's a different way to read that Old Testament that you're holding on to. What if you were to read it through this lens? Then maybe you would have recognized your master as the Messiah. And by this point, they're not getting suspicious, but they're feeling good about this guy. How does he know this? So they say to him, well, because he makes like he's going further, and they say, hey, do you have any place to stay tonight? And he said, well, why do you ask? Well, we're gonna have, would you like to come in and we're gonna have something to eat. Why don't you come and stay with us? He said, okay. So he goes in. Now this is where I make up part of the story in my own mind, but we're gonna finish with the lines that actually come from him. So I can imagine them going in and sitting down wherever they are, and he says, hey, do you guys have any bread or any wine? And they say, yeah, we got some of that. So he brings them out, and he probably says a blessing and breaks it and said, here, take this and eat it. And it says, with the breaking of the bread, their eyes were opened. But then it says, he vanished from their sight. Now, the gospel evangelist puts it that way because, and John probably, who's writing this, that was Luke actually. Luke probably heard it. I don't know where Luke heard it. But Luke put it that way because he was trying to put into words an experience he's trying to put into words a Michelangelo event that the people who are reading it only understand paint by numbers. Okay, so he's putting it into a story form that will make sense to people, but will also be a little misleading because the phrase, and he vanished from their sight, will lead you to believe again that something like that happened. Boom. That's not exactly what happened.
Was it they're falling away from their belief, or?
No, it was more so, and I no, nobody knows what actually. So what I want to, the other line they used, this will be maybe the key to unlocking the meaning of it. The other line they used was, "We're not our," after they no longer saw him, they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us when he was with us?" I think what happened there, now this is just me, okay? This is me trying to show you the elusiveness of trying to describe what the presence of the risen Christ was like, how they and how we experience him, and something else that I want to get to if I have time in a minute. But what I'm trying to elucidate is the way that the risen Christ manifested himself to them, and as he manifests himself to us. And that is this: because the stranger was an ordinary man, let's just assume for a minute, and this is kind of my interpretation of the event, in order to illustrate the manner in which the risen Christ manifests himself. This is the way I think about it. If it's helpful to you, great. If it's not, throw it out the window, okay? I think the stranger was actually a stranger. Just as I don't think that was the same with the gardener, but I think the stranger was actually a stranger. And he left them and said, "I've got to move on." And about 10 minutes later, after he was gone, it dawned on them that he had broken the bread and had said the blessing and had reinterpreted the scriptures in a way that allowed them to understand who they had in their presence in Jesus. And in retrospect, they said that was him. He was coming in the disguise of this stranger, and we weren't able to recognize it at the moment, but we recognize it now. Even if it was the stranger himself, it was still Christ and the stranger saying to them what they needed to hear to help the pieces fall into place for them. They realized that what they realized was he was still with them, but now he's touching them through these what appear to be serendipitous conversations with somebody we never met before. Is that making any sense to you?
Christ in each of us.
Correct. That's why in his actually earthly ministry, he says, "Whenever you do this to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do this to me." And you remember when Christ revealed himself to Paul, he said, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And Paul says, who are you? He says, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." Who was he persecuting? He was persecuting Stephen and all the early Christians. He wasn't, in his mind, he wasn't persecuting Christ. He was persecuting these strangers. But the risen Christ was already so identified with those strangers that you couldn't have a conversation with them without simultaneously having a conversation with him. He was in them and speaking through them and working through them in a way that it is possible for us only to recognize in retrospect. In other words, we encounter the risen Christ many times during the day, but we never put two and two together until it dawns on us a little while later. That was a miracle that those two things happened. It was no miracle. It was the presence of Christ doing the exact same things and working the exact same miracles and teaching the exact same lessons that he taught in Israel or in the Holy Land back then, but in a different way and in a different form. And once our eyes grow accustomed to him working through absolutely everything and everyone, because remember I said when he was annihilated, his presence was then infused into every person and every part of nature, even if they're unaware of it. That means that everything that operates on us at every moment is actually being used by the risen Christ to help us come to the same faith that he was trying to awaken people to when he was a single rabbi trying to do his work in the Holy Land. If you understand that, you will have understood a lot.
So you're saying Christ is in everyone. What if the everyone is a bad person?
No, it's irrelevant to Christ. Christ can use evil people to awaken you to his presence in them and his use of them to awaken you. Everything that comes into your life is an instrument of the risen Christ to awaken you to his nearness to you. He's not gone away from you. We're not going to talk today about the ascension, but the ascension is not a rocket ship where Jesus goes back to heaven. It's rather that he pulls heaven down into earth. The ascension is that I've come nearer to you now. The resurrection and the ascension are the same mystery. You no longer will, and this leads me into Mary Magdalene. You will no longer experience my physical body as a barrier to my being in you. You will no longer experience my limitedness as a single rabbi in Israel to my being able to teach you. Now Father Phil will be able to teach you. Now that cop who arrests you on the highway will be able to teach you, because I will use them as my words to you. I will be closer to you. I will be more involved with you, and I will be more touchable by you and more immediate to you than anything you could have ever imagined when you were sitting on the hillside listening to my words. I was far more distant to you as Jesus of Nazareth than I am to you as your risen Lord. That's the mystery of the resurrection. And people upon whom this realization dawned. See, I want to come back just real quickly here to Mary Magdalene. The words so Mary, finally her eyes were opened and she realized, oh my God, this is not the gardener, but he probably still looked like the gardener. She just saw him in a different way. He probably kept the same countenance, but it dawned on her, this man is Christ speaking to me, who looks like the gardener. How can you be in the garden? How can you? I mean, she's baffled by this. And so as soon as again, the key phrase here, it dawned on them. The vision of the risen Christ is an awareness that dawns on you. It's not something that you can stare at something and say, okay, show yourself to me. It's an awareness that you're being held by someone. You're being guided by someone. You're being intervened on by someone. And once your eyes are opened to the fact that everything you do to him, and everything that is done to you with him and by him and through him and for you, until that dawns on me, the risen Christ just becomes a figure who came out of the tomb to see his shadow. It has to move from that to being aware that the one speaking to me. Remember when the blind man and the other Samaritan woman, well, who is this one who's speaking to me? The one speaking to you is he. We should hear that in the voice of every person who encounters us. Well, who is the risen Lord? The one speaking to you at the checkout counter, that is she. Once that vision begins to take place, you rise from the dead. Everything is in a new light, and that's the light of the resurrection. You can see how hard it is giving this to a Sunday homily on Easter Sunday. Okay, one last thought. Oh, and so when Mary Magdalene did finally become aware that the gardener and the Christ are the same person, she went to embrace him. And what were his words to her? Do not cling to me. In other words, as Pope Benedict makes so clear, what Jesus was really saying to her there was, you can no longer hold on to me in the way that you have known me before. You must ascend with me to my Father, and you must learn how to see me in the light of a new presence to you. I will always be with you. This is what he tells his apostles before he ascends into heaven, so-called. He says, I am with you always, even till the end of the age. And they came down the mountain that day, Pope Benedict says. They came down the mountain that day different than when they came down the mountain from Calvary. They came down the mountain from the ascension with great joy, not because he had returned to heaven, but because it has now dawned on them that heaven has returned to earth. And heaven has enveloped earth. And the one who is in heaven is closer to us than we are to ourselves. The ascension is the awareness that heaven has come close to earth, so close that it's closer to us than we are to ourselves. And literally every movement in creation is heaven trying to get through to us. Be not afraid. Okay, one last, and so the people who had this, who upon whom all what I'm telling you now dawned without their being able to put it into words, those people upon whom the realization that Jesus is more with us now than he was when he taught us, that was the big change that took place in them. And it took place very gradually over those 40 days between the time of his death and his resurrection, through little episodes of what to the world would look like coincidence or serendipity. Through little coincidences, the apostles as a group began to see he has not left us. He's every time we break this bread, he's with us. We feel him most palpably, but invisibly, but very palpably. We feel like he's more with us now. One last thing I want to say that will maybe make this clear. When my mother died, or when anybody you love dies, but I speak of my mother in particular, because my mother, before she died, the last couple of years before she died, I found myself getting a little short and impatient and not bitter, that would be too strong, but more abrupt than I often would be with my mother, because she was such a nice person and she would do anything for anyone. And I said, Mom, you just got to stop being a doormat. You've got to buck up here a little bit. You can't keep giving your money away. People are taking advantage of you. You got to stop. He's just going to use that money for drugs. Philip, and she said, Philip, he's my son. I cannot not do it. She said, you just got it. You're not his mother. You don't understand. I said, I don't need to understand. You need to have some. Well, anyway, I went on like that. Then she died. And I could tell you another episode, but we're out of time. But anyway, the night before her funeral, I was laying in bed thinking, what am I going to say for the homily tomorrow? And I had a homily prepared, but God made it very clear to me that it was all crap. So I gave up and I said, I don't know what to say. And I was starting to get anxious because I had to say something. I was supposed to say something nice. And I could say a lot of nice things about my mother, but I didn't want just cliches coming out of my mouth. I wanted something from God coming out of my mouth. Well, about 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke up in a cold sweat. And I didn't hear a voice, but interiorly, I knew exactly what I was going to say. And if I had to put it into the words of what my soul heard, they went like this. Philip, what you took to be your mother's greatest character defect, letting people walk all over her, needs to turn your attention to me on the cross. I let people walk all over me too. And she is the best thing in your life. She is the closest thing in your life that will ever come to revealing my love for mankind. And I just started shivering I'm getting the chills now as I think about it. And that's what I said. And as she has been gone now. So here's the point about the resurrection. I hope this helps you celebrate Easter. I really didn't say ultimately what I wanted to say about, anyway, I'll say that at my homily on Easter. But as the years have gone by since her death and she's absent, just as when I'm absent from my son, he's in Michigan now. He's actually not on the call anymore. So I feel a kind of absence when his name disappears from the Zoom screen. But here's what I've learned. You know the phrase, absence makes the heart grow fonder? When you contemplate that phrase, and when I look at that phrase with my mother, not only does the absence make the heart grow fonder, it also makes the heart grow less possessive. And it also makes the heart, you realize, what I have realized is, in this space and in this absence of my mother's physical presence, the truth of who she is and the truth of who she was, but really the truth of who she is, becomes clearer and clearer to me. It's as if she's appearing to me in her truth in a way more visibly in her absence than she did in her presence. And so I realize she's appearing to me in her risen form. Even though the world sees it as an absence, I experience it as a fullness, because her love is now, and her presence is being communicated to me more in her absence than it was in her presence. And I believe that's the awareness that dawned on the apostles after Jesus was gone. He's not gone. He's showing us now the fullness of his reach.
So there's a connection between her living and her.
It's the same her, present in two different ways. Okay, well, we're going to leave it there, and I hope that's of some help to you. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll finish with the glory be, okay?